Okay, imagine you're walking through a narrow canyon right in the middle of a desert. The stone walls are rising hundreds of feet straight up above you. There's almost zero sunlight making it down. No road to follow, no river. Honestly, there's absolutely no obvious sign that anyone could even survive out here, let alone thrive. But then the canyon suddenly bends, and out of nowhere, boom, a massive city just appears, carved straight into this giant wall of red sandstone. We're talking huge columns, tombs, monuments, sprawling palaces. It's an entire metropolis that looks like it was quite literally pulled out of the mountain itself. Welcome to Petra. Now, you might be wondering, and honestly, this is the strangest thing about Petra. It's not just that a civilization managed to build a city out here in this harsh environment. The real mystery is, how on earth did they become rich enough to build it in the first place?
Well, the Nabataeans, the people who built it, they weren't sitting on gold mines, they didn't have massive iron reserves, and they definitely didn't command hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Their real fortune was, well, it was something a lot harder to see. They built an invisible network in a landscape where pretty much everyone else just died of thirst. And for centuries, that made them the undisputed masters of the ancient world's black market. To put this into perspective, let's go back over 2,000 years. The wealthiest empires on Earth at the time were completely addicted to luxury goods. We're talking frankincense, myrrh, exotic spices, aromatics, silk, textiles. These resins were burned in sacred temples everywhere, from Rome to Persia, and they were literally worth more than their weight in pure gold. In the ancient world, these weren't just nice-smelling candles, they were pure political currency. Emperors used them for religious sacrifices, massive funerals, royal perfumes, and high-end medicines. If a ruler wanted to flex his absolute power, he literally burned mountains of frankincense.
But there was a massive problem here. All these goods originated thousands of miles away, mostly in the remote regions of southern Arabia and India. So to reach those lucrative Mediterranean markets, caravans loaded with tons of cargo had to cross one of the most lethal environments on the entire planet, the Arabian Desert. It is a brutal, sun-bleached void spanning millions of square miles. And you know what? The desert absolutely does not care how expensive your cargo is. Silk, gold, spices, it doesn't matter. If you run out of water out there, your fortune becomes completely irrelevant in about 48 hours.
To cross this wasteland, an invading army, or even just a rival merchant, needed one thing above all else: water. Outside of the Nabataean tribe, even attempting this journey was basically a death sentence. To an outsider, the desert was just an empty, trackless graveyard. But the Nabataeans, they saw the landscape completely differently. Being nomadic Bedouins, they transformed their intimate, localized knowledge of that arid terrain into a secret infrastructure. Across hundreds of miles of empty sand, they engineered an invisible water grid that literally no one else could see. They didn't rely on obvious oases or open rivers that an enemy could just swoop in and capture. Instead, their engineers went deep underground. It was a brilliant process. First, they'd carve these massive cisterns directly into the bedrock underneath the sand. Next, they lined the inside of those subterranean vaults with a highly specialized waterproof plaster made from local minerals. This kept the captured rainwater cool and completely protected from evaporation, sometimes for years. Then came the real masterstroke. Once a cistern was full, they'd seal the opening with heavy flat stone slabs and then just cover the whole thing up with layers of local sand and gravel. They left absolutely zero landmarks on the surface. To you or me walking past, it's just another lifeless sand dune, but to the Nabataeans, it was a hidden reservoir. Think about what this means for a second. If a hostile army tried to follow a Nabataean caravan to map out their trade routes, the Nabataeans wouldn't even bother fighting them with swords. They just didn't need to. They would simply lead those pursuers deep into the most brutal, completely waterless stretches of the desert. Then, at night, the Nabataeans would quietly dig up a hidden stone, quench their thirst, rebury the vault, and completely vanish into the dark. Those pursuers were left totally stranded in 40-degree heat without a single drop of water. Actually, their dried bones ended up becoming the only guard posts the Nabataeans ever really needed. So the Nabataeans weren't just transporting goods. They occupied the ultimate financial bottleneck between the East and the West. Because as it turns out, once you control the only water in 1,000 miles of sand, you control the movement of all human wealth. Any caravans moving through their territory basically had no choice but to pay for passage. We're talking fees, taxes, storage, protection, access to marketplaces, and of course, access to water. The Nabataeans didn't need to actually cultivate the frankincense trees down in Yemen, and they didn't need to forge the steel over in India. They just owned the road. And in economics, the person who controls the road between the producer and the consumer,
That's the person who makes the real fortune. They took a hostile wilderness that terrified the rest of the world and turned it into a massive money-printing machine. And those profits are what built a city that honestly looked like it was pulled right out of a dream. If you walk through Petra today, the sheer scale of the place feels almost impossible to process. The famous structure known as the Treasury rises over 12 stories high, carved directly out of a sheer sandstone cliff face. It has these elaborate, massive Corinthian columns, detailed sculptures, and grand doorways. And get this, it was carved from the top of the mountain downward. Workers physically hung from ropes, chiseling the stone away foot by foot, leaving behind a monument designed to survive for thousands of years.
Now, despite its modern name, it wasn't actually a bank vault. The name Treasury came way later from local Bedouin legends. It was most likely a royal tomb. But more than that, it was a monumental statement directed at every visiting diplomat, merchant, and Roman ambassador. It essentially said, "We carve this out of raw mountain stone using the wealth of a desert you cannot navigate."
For centuries, the greatest empires of the ancient world tried their hardest to break them. Greek warlords sent whole armies into the desert to seize Nabataean treasures. And what happened? Those armies were ambushed in narrow mountain passes or just forced to retreat after running completely out of water. The Nabataeans proved a crucial point. You don't actually need a massive standing army to defend your homeland. You just need to make the cost of reaching you far higher than any empire is willing to pay. You really cannot conquer a society whose true strength is entirely invisible. Well, that is, until the world changed around them.
In 106 CE, the rapidly expanding Roman Empire formally annexed the kingdom. But here's the thing, Rome didn't destroy Petra with some catastrophic fiery siege, they just took political control. Petra's real downfall happened because the global economy completely shifted right under their feet.
You see, human technology never really stands still. As Roman naval architecture and maritime navigation improved, merchants discovered something totally revolutionary. They realized they didn't need to pay crazy high taxes to drag slow camel caravans across thousands of miles of scorching desert anymore. Instead, they could just load tons of cargo onto large wooden merchant ships over in India and sail directly across the Red Sea straight into Egyptian ports. Maritime trade was faster, it was cheaper, and it carried far more cargo, all without having to rely on those desert water networks. Almost overnight, those incredibly lucrative ancient instance routes began to dry up. Think about it. If merchants can bypass a super expensive overland journey, the people who own that journey suddenly lose their entire purpose. The desert hadn't changed. Those hidden cisterns were still full of water beneath the sand. The sandstone monuments were still standing proud. But the value of their knowledge had plummeted. Then, devastating earthquakes hit in the 4th and 6th centuries, shattering the city's complex aqueducts and stone buildings. Generation by generation, the merchants left, the money vanished, and the local population slowly just walked away. By the time European explorers rediscovered Petra in 1812, it was nothing more than a silent, empty ghost city buried in the canyon rocks.
So what's the big takeaway here? The story of Petra leaves us with one of the most important lessons in all of human history. Real power isn't built on massive armies, hordes of gold, or giant physical walls. Real power is built on knowledge. It's the knowledge of exactly where the water is hidden, which mountain pass is actually safe, which route is going to be profitable, and most importantly, how to take an environment that terrifies literally everyone else and make it work exclusively for you. The Nabataeans didn't try to fight the desert. They mastered it, they monetized it, and they ruled an empire from the shadows, right up until the world found another way around the sand.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of our own modern empires are built on economic realities that could just shift overnight? While the Nabataeans vanished, way across the Atlantic Ocean, another ancient culture was building pyramids even larger than the ones in Egypt, only to disappear without leaving a single written word behind. Deep in the heartland of North America, the ancient city of Cahokia housed tens of thousands of citizens and ruled this vast trade network before its entire culture just dissolved into thin air. Tap the next explainer on your screen right now to uncover America's forgotten pyramids that history books completely ignore.